Hello, everybody. I thought I would do a series of several different miniature courses on the nakshatras, what exactly the nakshatras are, and the meaning of each of the individual nakshatras. So I thought I would give this first class as somewhat of an offering of a free class just to give a general idea of what the nakshatras actually are, which may surprise you quite a lot because people have all sorts of different conceptions of what the nakshatras actually are. So first of all, the nakshatras, simply put, are 27 sections of the sky, each of which is 13 degrees and 20 minutes in length. Now, for certain uses, there's also a 28th nakshatra, which is known as Abhijit. But as you'll see over the duration of this course, when we get to the relevant text from a particular ancient text called Taittiriya Brahmana, which is itself part of the Krishna Yajurveda, we'll discover that Abhijit is really a part of Uttara Ashadha Nakshatra. So for the purposes of this particular course, we're going to be working with 27 different nakshatras. So both the nakshatras and the zodiac are a division of the heavens. But it's important to understand that they are two completely different divisions of the heavens. And most people have a tendency to understand the nakshatras as being a part of the zodiac, which is really a misconception about that. Some people think that nakshatras are a subsection of the zodiac, but the zodiac and the nakshatras are actually two separate divisions that can, for the sake of astrological interpretation, be connected to each other for the sake of interpreting a horoscope. But they're not one and the same. They are two independent and very different things. And we're going to talk about some of the ways that they're different. But I kind of want to take you into a diagram to hopefully illustrate this point. Now, you may see a brief flash in your video here for a moment. Sadly, as I'm recording this, I'm wanting to keep the file size low for people. And if I use video editing software for it and add transitions in, it's just going to make the file size too large. So I'm going to just pause the video every now and then. And when that happens, you might see a brief flash in the video. So pardon my drawing, which I know is not the best, but it's just enough to give you a general idea. So this blue sphere is the Earth, as you may have figured, right? And where you see this line going through the Earth, that's the polar axis, from the North Pole to the South Pole. And as you can see, the Earth is kind of tilted on its axis. Okay. Now, this golden line here that I'm running along is the ecliptic. That's the path of the sun, where in the northern hemisphere, the sun is going from winter solstice down here to summer solstice, respectively. Okay, so from the northern hemisphere, the sun is at its southernmost point when we're having winter solstice, and it's at its northernmost point when we're having summer solstice. And in the southern hemisphere, obviously, that's flipped. But the idea that I'm trying to give you is this is the path of the sun. So what the zodiac actually is 12 equal portions of this ecliptic. Okay? We'll go more into that later on, but the zodiac is 12 equal portions of the ecliptic. Now, the fixed stars are obviously separate from this ecliptic, right? If you notice, from our perspective here on Earth, the sun appears to move south to north and then back to south again. Okay? Whereas from our perspective here on Earth, this is the plane of the stars, the fixed stars. So that plane of the fixed stars, for the most part, moves from our perspective on an east-west rotation. Now, if you're on some parts of the planet and you watch the constellations, they will appear to move north and south at certain times. But this is really something that's created by the tilt of the Earth on its axis. So the general idea I'm trying to get across here is that the plane of the stars, or the fixed stars, is separate from the plane of the ecliptic. So what the nakshatras are is when the 27 equal portions of that stellar sphere, or the plane of the stars, it's where they intersect the ecliptic. Okay, but this can be calculated in a lot of different ways. I want to let you know that. Okay, so basically they're kind of a cross between where the 27 equal divisions of the plane of the stars, which creates the nakshatras, it's where that crosses the plane of the ecliptic, is what the nakshatras are actually considered. If you know a little bit about what the north and south node are, you would understand that really the nakshatras are very similar to the nodes. They're actually a type of a node. It's where the plane of the stars intersects the plane of the sun for our particular interpretation purposes. So we're going to go back in to, we're going to leave this screen, so there'll be a pause for a moment. So as the zodiac, or the 12 equal portions of the ecliptic, and the stellar sphere, which is what the nakshatras are a division of, are two independent planes, it's important to understand that they are two independent things, which we connect to each other for the sake of horoscope interpretation. Now, going a little bit deeper with this particular concept, the 12 equal portions of the ecliptic, or the zodiac as they're called, or the rashis, which are the 12 equal portions of the ecliptic, also known as the signs, for people who are more familiar with that terminology, they represent a field in which a planet or a force operates. Let's go deeper with that particular concept. In Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, it's spoken of as the planets being conscious incarnations of Vishnu. Now, with the Rashis are commented on as being the unconscious limbs of Vishnu. So basically, the Rashis are a field in which a planet operates, or equally a house operates, which is basically a condition that's created by a Rashi in the first place. Okay, so for our particular understanding here, Rashis represent a field in which a planet or a force operates. Rashis help to fine-tune that particular force to affect a particular area of our life through creating bhavas, or houses. So we're going to come to the function of nakshatras in a little bit, but to give a technical explanation for our purposes presently, nakshatras are connected to, or perhaps anchored / referred to, specific fixed stars of the constellations. Now, obviously, not every constellation in the sky which is connected to a nakshatra is going to be exactly 13 degrees and 20 minutes in length, as we can understand from that diagram that I was showing you before, right? We're looking at a rather large plane split into 27 equal portions for the sake of division, right? But obviously not every constellation is exactly 13 degrees and 20 minutes in length that's connected to a nakshatra. So for the sake of astrological consideration, what we're doing is we're creating our own equal division. So let's go a little bit deeper with this concept, because in order to understand the difference between nakshatras and the zodiac, we need to also understand the zodiac. So within Vedic astrology, there are presently at least two main schools of thought. And each of these schools of thought connects the zodiac and the nakshatras in a completely different way. So let's talk first about the school of thought that uses the sidereal zodiac. Okay, so the zodiac, obviously being 12 equal portions of the ecliptic, which is the extension of the plane of the apparent path of the sun from solstice to solstice out into the heavens. Well, the premise of the sidereal zodiac is that the signs of the zodiac should be connected to the fixed stars of the constellations. Now, obviously, not every constellation, Aries, Taurus, etc., is exactly 30 degrees in length. So in order for the zodiac to be mapped to the constellations, an occasional adjustment has to be made. Why? Well, because the relationship between the Earth and the Sun is different from the relationship between the Earth and the stars. Equally, the connection between our solar system and the fixed stars is something that alters with time. So the relationship between the zodiac and the constellations to which the sidereal zodiac refers the zodiac to also alters over time. So there's a calculation called the Ayanamsha, which accounts for this, for understanding this alteration. It accounts for the shift in relation between the zodiac and the fixed stars. And this has to be adjusted every once in a while for accuracy. And there are many different Ayanamshas. Okay, most people are familiar with Lahiri Ayanamsha, but there are so many different Ayanamshas. So with the sidereal zodiac, the relationship between the nakshatras and the zodiac will stay constant. For example, 0 degrees to 13 degrees 20 minutes of Aries will always be the nakshatra Ashwini. So let's talk about the school of thought that uses the tropical zodiac. Well, this school of thought has at the foundation of its theory the concept that the zodiac and the constellations are two separate things. It views the zodiac as simply 12 equal portions of the ecliptic. It views the relationship between the Earth and the Sun as something separate than the relationship between the Earth and the fixed stars. So therefore, it does not map the zodiac to the constellations. It uses the nakshatras as well and does not calculate the nakshatras tropically. It calculates the nakshatras sidereally, but the zodiac in a tropical manner. So I'm going to repeat that. Those who are using a tropical zodiac with sidereal nakshatras obviously are not calculating the nakshatras tropically. The nakshatras are being calculated sidereally, but the zodiac is being calculated in a tropical manner. So it then connects the two. But the separation between the zodiac and the nakshatras is more deeply understood with this system. And with this system, the nakshatras do not stay static in their relation to the zodiac. In other words, 0 degrees to 13 degrees 20 minutes of Aries will not stay Ashwini nakshatra throughout time. It will instead alter with time. In short, the position of a nakshatra in relation to a zodiac sign will not stay static, but it will drift over hundreds of years. Now, for the sake of illustrating this point, I'm going to take us into a chart. So the chart that we're looking at is more of a modern day chart. It's not the chart for today. It's actually the chart for, I think, like about 5 days from now, because I wanted to place the moon in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra for the sake of this particular diagram. Here, I'll bring up a screen for north and south for those of you who are also comfortable with that. And hopefully my head won't be blocking that. So we'll move my head over here. Okay, so looking at this, we can see that the moon, using the tropical zodiac with sidereal nakshatras, is presently, in a special calculation for the nakshatras, I should say, and a special ayanamsha, that the moon is in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. Okay, you can see it in this particular chart over here, and we notice that it's in Pisces and it's in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. If we go over to this chart and we look at the same, here we'll see the moon in Pisces and Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at a chart for Alexander the Great, who was born in 356 BC. And he has Rahu in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. And it's interesting because you'll note that Rahu is not in Pisces. Okay, so let's go take a look at this. Here we have Rahu in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra, but it's actually in Aquarius. Okay, over here we see Venus and Jupiter in Leo, but they're actually in Hasta Nakshatra. Okay, so if you note, the relationship is changing over the centuries. Okay, so this is a chart that uses the tropical zodiac with sidereal nakshatras. And it's making it so that the position of the nakshatras will be in different rashis, thereby denoting the difference that there is a difference between the stellar sphere and the plane of the ecliptic. Okay, so now with the sidereal zodiac, you'll notice that those things just stay static over time. But obviously, with the tropical zodiac, the difference between the zodiac and the nakshatras becomes more prominent. And it's noticeable that they are not connected to the zodiac, but instead mapped back on to the zodiac. Whereas with the sidereal zodiac, they're taking the zodiac and mapping it to the fixed stars and trying to keep that anchored over time. So, as the two separate systems of approaching the relationship between the zodiac and the nakshatras are vastly different, there needs to be, in my humble opinion, and equally that of other astrologers, two separate ways of calculating their position. This, even though both systems work with sidereal nakshatras. As the premise for mapping the zodiac to the constellations is the foundation of the sidereal school of thought, the position of the fixed stars related to the nakshatras themselves needs to be calculated in reference to the ecliptic. So we need to use ecliptic coordinates to map the nakshatras to the zodiac when we are doing a sidereal zodiac with sidereal nakshatras. As the tropical sidereal system is firmer in the concept that the two circles are vastly different, a different calculation for understanding the relationship between the two becomes important. The motion of the ecliptic is apparently north to south. This is due to the Earth's relationship to the Sun over the course of a solar year, but the relationship between the Earth and the fixed stars is more firmly an east-west relationship. If you watch the stars over time, their motion will be noted more as east to west, as I was saying before, with some slight variance. Okay? For instance, at the equator, a particular constellation may appear to be further north for some of the year and further south at others, but this is really due to the tilt of the Earth on its axis and is less drastic than the relationship between the Earth and the Sun, which is very prominent in terms of its south, north, and back to south movement. Okay? For this purpose, calculating the position of the fixed stars for the tropical sidereal system needs to have a foundation in connection with Dhruva, which is how we judge where our poles are. Dhruva is the pole star, which is how we understand the position of our poles, and the equator, or the midpoint of the Earth. And this calculation is firmly founded in relation to the calculation for the fixed stars in Surya Siddhanta. So in other words, the system that's called the Dhruva equatorial system is connected to the Dhruva coordinates in Surya Siddhanta for the fixed stars of the zodiac. And the Surya Siddhanta, for those of you who don't know, is the foundational text behind Vedic astronomical thought. Okay, so I'm going to bring up another diagram. This diagram is borrowed, I should mention, from my colleague Ernst Wilhelm, because he did such a wonderful drawing of it. It's absolutely perfect. So I want to use this to explain it. So this blue circle in the center is obviously the Earth. This blue ellipse around the center is obviously the equator. The line going down through is the North Pole down to the South Pole. This gold circle is the ecliptic, or the zodiac. And this cylinder that you're looking at is actually 27 equal portions of the stellar sphere. Okay? So with the sidereal zodiac, what they are doing is they're taking a fixed star and they're judging its position out in space based upon where it intersects the ecliptic. Okay, so they use the ecliptic coordinates in order to determine that. But the actuality of the position of that fixed star is not necessarily where it appears to be on the ecliptic. And there's an understanding of that, within most people who have the astronomical understanding of what the nakshatras are and how they connect to the zodiac. There's that understanding in Vedic thought. For those of us who are using a tropical zodiac with sidereal nakshatras, it gives more of an inaccurate representation. And so we use a calculation, or the majority of us use a calculation, I should say, not everybody does, that draws a right angle between the poles and the equator, takes the Dhruva coordinates for the fixed stars from Surya Siddhanta and maps their position in relation to the poles and the equator, thereby giving us what we feel to be a more stable representation of where the actual fixed stars are. Now, obviously, that will be different than the observational concept of where the fixed stars are. Okay, so let's go back to what we were talking about, but I just wanted to give you an idea of that. So now we kind of have a general understanding of what the nakshatras are astronomically in relation to the components of astrology. Now let's understand what the nakshatras are on a more in-depth level in terms of the purpose that they serve. For this, we want to have a conversation, a very general conversation about Varuna, who is one of the ancient Vedic deities. And Varuna's association in terms of what he was connected with changed and altered over time. But something that was said about Varuna is that he placed the stars in the firmament. Okay, so that's an important concept to understand. So Varuna as a Vedic deity was first connected with the skies, then the waters, then justice, and then truth. Varuna was also one of the Adityas, okay, the sons of Aditi. The Rig Veda lists 7 Adityas, while the Bhagavata Puran lists 12, which are reference to the sun. So there's importance to this connection between Varuna as the Vedic deity connected to the skies and the sequence in which he was then related to waters, justice, and truth. Now, as I was saying, Varuna was noted for placing the nakshatras in the heavens. Varuna was also the lord of the waters, as we were saying, and water creatures. And he also, as that particular concept, relates to the oceanic consciousness of God, which is vast and deep. Okay? The ocean waves that we experience in life are a result of the moon's gravitational pull on the earth. So that's an interesting thought, because when we look at the ocean, we think of vastness. And Varuna, as being connected to the oceans, is meant to connect us to the understanding of the vast oceanic consciousness of God. Okay? And Varuna being connected to the ocean, and the ocean's waves being connected to the moon's gravitational pull on the earth, is also a very interesting understanding, especially when we go further into it, okay, which I'm going to do now. Okay, so for those of you who just aren't getting it yet, hopefully you will here in a moment. So Lord Krishna states that amongst water creatures, he is Varuna. Krishna is the incarnation of Vishnu connected to the moon, because remember, all the planets are related to a specific incarnation of Vishnu. Krishna is the incarnation of Vishnu connected to the moon. So it's no surprise to understand Varuna as the presiding deity of the moon, and in addition, the oceans. So think about that concept. So Varuna relates to the oceanic consciousness of God, which is vast and deep. But Varuna also connects to the moon, which creates waves in that ocean. And that formerly placid, still ocean then has waves in it. right? Just like our own consciousness or our own thought patterns can go from being peaceful or calm or in a more sattvic, what's the phrase? Sattvic phase, right? A more balanced phase. And then all of a sudden a thought can come along and form ripples in that. Well, Varuna is connected to both that placid, still concept of the ocean and equally the turbulence that arises in the ocean. That's, definite food for thought. Okay. So Varuna placed the nakshatras in the sky. And each night, Varuna, as the moon, visits a different one. As he does so, he creates waves of consciousness. The moon is also connected to the earth. And as we note, Varuna is also a sun deity. Now, the sun astrologically relates to the Atman. Best way to understand the Atman is as the soul of everything from the soul of a coffee cup to the soul of the desk that I'm sitting at, just generally the soul of everything. Okay. But it also connects to the understanding of the individual soul. Okay. So Varuna is a sun deity. So Varuna relates to the Atman, relates to the soul of everything, relates to the Pada Atman, the supreme soul, as much as he relates to the individual soul on that particular level, because it's all the same soul. It's all Atman. All right. Now, Varuna is also the moon. So what's the moon? The moon is our consciousness. It's our sensory mind. It's called manas, how we perceive things, how we subjectively experience things. All those things come to our understanding through our consciousness of our Atman. So Varuna is simultaneously the sun or the Atman and equally the consciousness, right? So Varuna is the moon, bridges the Atman, more specifically the Pada Atman, together with the earthbound consciousness of the Jivatman. And there's a particular sutra or chapter in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra that covers this really well, and I kind of wanted to add this for the sake of this particular discussion. So in chapter 1, 21 through 24, basically Parashara says, the Lord is in all beings and the entire universe in him. All beings contain both Jivatma and Paramatma amshas, or Jivatman portions, individual soul portions, and Para-Atman portions. Some have predominance of the former, while some have the latter in predominance. Paramatmamsha is predominant in the grahas, the sun, etc., and Brahma, Shiva, and the rest of the deities. Their powers or consorts too have predominance of Paramatmamsha. Others have more of Jivatmamsha. So their powers or consorts have predominance of Paramatmamsha. Okay, so the Nakshatras are referred to as the wives of the moon. So they too are abundant in the supreme soul, but we as individuals have more Jivatman in our nature. So following further upon understanding what the nakshatras are and what function they tend to serve astrologically, so we're remembering that the sun is the Atman and the moon is the sensory mind or our conscious manas, right? Okay, so the moon's purpose is to reflect the light of the sun. That's what it does, isn't it? Its purpose is to reflect the light of the Atman. As well, its purpose is to influence the tides or waves of consciousness to stimulate the growth of our evolutionary path. So I'll repeat that again. The moon's purpose is to influence the tides or the waves of consciousness in order to stimulate the growth of our evolutionary path. A strong moon with positive influence can help to do so in a clearer and less distorted manner, and a weak moon does so with more distortion to the degree of its more distorting influence, dependent upon how bad that distorting influence is. A waxing moon will cause us to grow our life externally in a productive manner, in harmony with our evolutionary path. And when the moon wanes, external growth decays, forcing introspection. Okay, and that's how we tend to relate to our life in general. Sometimes things wane and we become more introspective. Sometimes we're growing things more externally. So remembering the wives of the deity carry the Shakti of that particular deity, and they too have the Pada Atman. As I was saying before, the moon is wed to the Nakshatras. So the Nakshatras are the powers of God given to us to grow our relation to a particular planet or area of our life through the houses so that we evolve. These powers operate on the level of the Pada Atman and the Jivatman both. With some nakshatras, each of us as individuals have a higher level of Pada Atman influence. And with others, there's more of a higher level of Jivatman influence. Our goal over the course of our incarnation is to harmonize the two. And the job of an astrologer should be, I want to say, to help their clients to do the same. Plain and simple. Prediction alone is useless without also the guidance that helps the individual to unite the Jivatman and the Pada Atman. Okay? So dependent upon how much, or I should say, the level of Pada Atman connection to a nakshatra an individual will have, and the level of Jivatman association an individual will have with each individual nakshatra will vary in each individual Varga chart or divisional chart. And that's dependent upon, for the most part, the well-being of the planet that is what I like to call its emissary, because planets don't really rule nakshatras, because the whole connection between planets and nakshatras is really most deeply understood through Vimshotri Dasha, because with Vimshotri Dasha, an individual enters this particular lifetime based upon the nakshatra that their moon is in. So if their moon is in Mula Nakshatra, which has as its emissary Ketu, then their life starts with Ketu Dasha, and so on and so forth. So each nakshatra has a planet connected to it for the sake of Vimshotri Dasha, but with other Dasha systems, the planet that's connected to each of those nakshatras can be different. Okay, and so what we call a nakshatra dispositor is not really in its essence a nakshatra dispositor. It's just a planet that's connected to a particular nakshatra for the sake of understanding how Vimshotri Dasha operates. Okay, but the well-being of the planet that's connected to the nakshatra will influence the overall energy of that particular nakshatra for the individual. Okay. Another point that I wanted to touch on is that as nakshatras technically have a more stellar association, right? Which means they're an independent sphere, which is kind of connected to the zodiac for most astrological purposes, but they have a more stellar association and foundation. They always need to be calculated sidereally, in my opinion. And it's safe to say that they're astronomical in nature. Now, the astronomy in a horoscope is most strongly represented through the Rashi chart or the D1. All other charts are a division of the signs of the Rashi chart. Okay? With planets and house cusps being placed in a particular sign in that particular Varga, dependent upon which division of the sign in the Rashi Varga that they fall in. So let's repeat that. The astronomy in a horoscope is most strongly represented through the Rashi chart or the D1. That's the chart that shows the actual astronomy. All other charts are just a division of this astronomy with planets being placed in different signs based upon what section of a sign in the Rashi chart it falls in. So therefore, I'm of the opinion that if a planet or house cusp falls in a particular nakshatra in the Rashi chart, it's going to keep its association with that nakshatra in every Varga chart. So for instance, if, as we were looking at the moon before in Pisces, in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra in the Rashi chart, here, let me give a little diagram association of this so we can understand that. So here we have that chart that we were initially looking at, and I'll move my head over again, where we have the moon in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. Notice it's in Pisces, right? This is the astronomical connection of the chart. So therefore, if we go into the, let's say, the Shadamsha chart, maybe that's not a good example because the moon's still in Pisces. Let's pick the Bamsha chart. It's still staying in Pisces. Why don't we pick another planet? Okay, so here we have Venus in Swati Nakshatra, okay, where it's in Scorpio, Venus retrograde in Swati Nakshatra. So if we switch this to the Dashamsha chart, here you're going to have Venus in Gemini, but notice it's still in Swati Nakshatra. Now, this is functioning off the concept that nakshatras are astronomical, so you have to keep their position from the Rashi chart in terms of the nakshatra they're in. So in other words, if Venus is in Swati nakshatra but in Scorpio in the Rashi chart, no matter what sign it ends up in one of the other Varga charts, it's still going to be in Swati nakshatra as you see it in the Dashamsha. Let's go look at the Bamsha chart. Here you'll see Venus in Gemini again in Swati nakshatra. How about the Shadamsha chart where you have Venus in Scorpio, Swati nakshatra? Okay, and we look at the Vimshamsha chart and you have Venus in Pisces in Swati Nakshatra. So notice it stays in Swati Nakshatra regardless of which Rashi it ends up in. That's going to do it for this brief discussion of what nakshatras actually are. In the next videos that I cover, we're going to go into description of what the nakshatras are, their overall particular energy, what they relate to through understanding different components or different associations of the nakshatra, or different associations of the nakshatras, I should say. So I do hope that you will watch those videos as well. And thank you very much for watching. Bye now.